If you ever travel to countries like Ireland, Iceland, or the United Kingdom, police officers are usually unarmed and carry out their duties through non-lethal means. In the case of the Republic of Ireland, the Irish National Policing Agency and Garda Síochána has a long-standing tradition for its officers of not being equipped with firearms since 1922, with a couple of exceptions. Detectives and arms specialists of the Garda Emergency Response Unit are the only ones that are authorized to carry and use firearms while on duty. The Garda Emergency Response Unit is unique in nature, as it is a specialized organization that carries out high-level situations, from hostages to terrorist incidents. They're the sort of special weapons and tactics group that you may find in the United States, but the European equivalent for that terminology is Special Interventionist Unit, or SIUs. SIUs can be found across the European continent, operated by law enforcement or military services for high-risk tactical support, but given rising incidents due to extremism, such as the 2015 Paris attacks, they're generally deployed for combating terrorism. Many of these interventionist units are well known due to media portrayals, such as the German GSG-9, the French GIGN, and the Dutch DSI. Despite their commitments and continuing efforts in thwarting terrorism within their sovereign borders, there exists a national effort by European Special Interventionist Units to conduct joint exercises and operations that seek for counterterrorism at the European level. Europe is a well-known target for many criminal and terrorist organizations that seek to conduct criminal operations or violence. The European Union and its member states have instituted laws and cooperation agreements that would thwart criminal and terror activity, such as the establishment of the European Police to policing cross-crime borders. Amongst these cooperation agreements was the establishment of a European framework for the purposes of joint and counter-terror operations, and that was the Atlas Network. The Atlas Network is an association of police tactical units of 31 countries. 27 of those are member states of the European Union, with 4 out of the 31 of these countries are non-EU participants of the association, which include Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. Many military organizations use specialized units for conducting special operations, which are also applied to law enforcement organizations, which many European police agencies have coined the term Special Intervention Unit. The concept behind the Atlas Network and Special Intervention Units can be traced back to the 1972 Munich Massacre. This event involved members of the Black September organization, a Palestinian militant group that held several Israeli athletes hostage on September 5, 1972. The motive behind this terrorist attack was for the release of 232 Palestinians, a Japanese terrorist in an Israeli prison, and 2 German members of the Red Army faction. The German government negotiated for the release of the Israeli athletes with the Minister of Interior, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, along with other German politicians, offering themselves to be exchanged with the hostages. The leader of the group, Latif Afif, strongly rejected such a proposal. A day after, on September 6th, the German government and the captors negotiated to take them to the airport, where they would fly out in the early hours to Cairo along with the hostages. The plan would have the captors and hostages taken to Fürstenfeldbruck, a military air base, by helicopters that were on standby for them. Arriving at the base would be a Lufthansa Boeing 727, which would take them to Cairo. In reality, the Bundespolizei were awaiting at the airport to take out the terrorists. However, the plan backfired when they realized that there were 8 terrorists as opposed to 5. Furthermore, the intervention team that was on standby at the airport only consisted of 5 officers, and none of them were trained marksmen. When the captives and hostages arrived at the airport in an empty Boeing 727, the incident commander began the operation, resulting in a heavy gunfight with the captives and the police. The ensuing battle resulted in several casualties, including a friendly fire on an officer who was mistaken as a terrorist. When all the captors had been neutralized, the damage had been done. Only 3 out of the 8 captors had survived in the ensuing gunfight, with all of the Israeli hostages being killed by their captors. What initially was supposed to be a plan to take out the terrorists and save the hostages now became a failed rescue operation. When the captors and hostages were brought over to the military base initially, the first helicopter exploded when one of the captors tossed a grenade, killing all 4 hostages. The second helicopter that carried the remaining 7 Israeli athletes were all but shot, leaving towards a plane with no hostages. Within a month after the arrest of the remaining 3 captors of the Black September organization, they were all released after the hijackers of Lufthansa Flight 615 demanded their release on October 29, 1972. The aftermath of the massacre was criticized by the media and the German government. As the failed rescue operation resulted in the tragic loss of all 11 Israeli athletes, controversy behind the operation, such as the fact that the sniper team on the ground had no radios, or the German team that was supposed to be inserted had abandoned their mission without approval. Despite the mismanagement, the consequences behind the Munich Massacre was enough to have the German government devise a plan in establishing a dedicated counter-terror unit to respond with adequacy and professionalism. Weeks after Munich, Grenzschutzgruppe 9, or GSG-9, was established to prevent future Munichs and future terrorist attacks. As GSG-9 was formed, the Belgian government had formed their own dedicated counter-terror unit as a response to Munich called the Eine Group. The Munich Massacre had not only had an effect in German policy concerning terrorism, but also within the pan-European dialogue of the European communities. As mentioned in my European police video, the European communities created the Trevi Group to discuss and counter terrorist attacks within the European continent. What was initially a dialogue forum within Trevi concerning European police cooperation slowly transitioned into the creation of a European framework concerning terrorism, but it was only after Munich that such action had taken place. Further cooperation agreements in an EEC meeting mandated that the member states are required to create and maintain a specially trained group capable of responding to terrorist attacks. This specific agreement fortified the creation of what is now known as Special Interventionist Units within the European continent. Prior to this agreement, many European nations lacked a dedicated unit to combating terrorism. Let's take for instance the Republic of Ireland. Ireland prior to 1977 had no specific unit within An Garda Síochána to combat terror attacks, let alone a dedicated armed response unit, as the organization as a whole is mainly an unarmed national police. It was only in 1978 that An Garda Síochána established a special task force, which would later become the Emergency Response Unit in 1987. Over the years, as extremism and terrorism rose to its highest peak in the 1980s, various special interventionist units continued to enhance and strengthen their capabilities. Many European countries that maintain an interventionist unit kept their level of standards and professionalism at a high bar through the emphasis of training and, whenever appropriate, sharing each other's experiences. However, while training with other interventionist units was unique at the time, there was very little cooperation between European interventionist units in the counterterrorism field. In 1996, the European Union attempted to initiate a counterterrorism cooperation agreement by passing a decision on creating a directory called the Directory of Specialized Counterterrorist Competencies, Skills, and Expertise to facilitate cooperation on special interventions between member states. Oh my god, that was a mouthful. In other words, the EU essentially created a cooperation framework by creating a system that contained a list of each special interventionist unit of the respective member state and requested an initiation of joint cooperation. Despite this attempt to push for a pan-European counter-terror network, very little was done to put it into force, and an event much like Munich had to be taken as an example in order for such cooperation to take place. September 11 was, if anything, a modern-day Munich Massacre. The aftermath of the attacks forced the European Council to hold an extraordinary meeting on September 20th to discuss new procedures in increasing European security, both foreign and domestic. The meeting directed the European police to update the 1996 Directory of Specialized Counter-Terrorists and the creation of the European Police Chiefs Task Force, a body consisting of the highest police representatives of the EU member states. The European Police Chiefs Task Force was directed to meet with the EU's head of counter-terror units and organize and coordinate a cooperation of the respective special interventionist units, much like the Trevi Group's work in the European cooperation back in the 80s. Under the aegis of the EPCTF, an informal network of cooperation structured codenamed Atlas was established. It's worthy to note that when Atlas was initially established for the aforementioned reasons, it wasn't in any capacity to be deployed collectively to assist an EU member state in times of crisis, though it was considered a possibility by some EU officials. Nonetheless, special interventionist units involved in the Atlas network strengthened their cooperation by enhancing their capabilities in various terrains and development of special equipment. However, the concept of operational cooperation in the case of deployment of foreign police or military units into a sovereign country was not only a sensitive issue but controversial. This is especially for the case when governments are reluctant to the idea when it entails the possibility of using deadly force. There were earlier onset discussions within the EU by the six largest European states to create an interim solution that develops joint support teams to offer operational assistance in the case of terrorist incidents upon request, which was agreed on in March 2006. It was only in December of the same year that the Austrian government presented a draft for the basis of legal framework for cooperation between special intervention units in times of crisis. Since its establishment in 2001, the Atlas Network has more recently focused on expanding and enhancing its special interventionist units by hosting yearly exercises, with the most recent exercise, Exercise Firestorm, taking place on March 2023. Exercise Firestorm comes as the Atlas Network establishes a support office within Europol's European Counterterrorism Center in 2018. What initially had been proposed in 2017 created a wider network within Europol in liaising with law enforcement agencies and better coordination in areas involving terrorism and serious and organized crime. Much like Europol and its prior history in creating the cooperation level with other European law enforcement agencies, the Atlas Network was a means of necessary cooperation in the fight against terrorism and serious crime. Unlike Europol, however, Atlas's foundation was created after history's two infamous events that led European nations to find solutions to a problem. When many European nations needed inspiration to form their own counter-terror unit, they sought out the Germans and Belgians who created GSG-9 and the Diane Group, respectively, but ultimately had to learn from their own mistakes. The reason why was due to the fact that GSG-9 and others alike were cautious in sharing their SOPs, expertise, and skills when in fear of losing their competitive advantage. This coupled with maintaining their reputable status within the law enforcement community. Despite the Atlas's network continuing strive in enhancing cooperation at the European level, the Atlas Network has not been deployed in combating terrorism in another state, whether officially or unofficially. Regardless, their existence allows many special interventionist units to cooperate, share, and develop their ability to combat threats within and outside of Europe.